Hi guys, Rob from Rob's Model Cars, and today we're going to start part 4 of the how to build the LB Performance Lamborghini Aventador. Now in the last video I showed you how to disassemble the Auto Art die-cast body, and the next step I've done is I've stripped all the paint off the die-cast metal body. Now before you go ahead and do that, I just wanted to point out that there's a couple of little plastic parts. There's one here, and there's one here, and a little bonnet latch piece here. Now, they are fitted through the back. There's just some plastic pins. Just get your hobby knife and cut the back of those pins, and you can lever these little vents off. Now, when the bonnet is reattached, you do see these little plastic vents here, and the paint stripper will dissolve those plastic pieces. So very important to remove those pieces before you strip the paint. Otherwise, I've already done a video on how to strip the paint from a die-cast body. I did it exactly that same way, stripped all the paint off from the underside and the outside, and now I can show you the most difficult part of this kit, which is how to fit the resin front bumper bar, which requires cutting off of this die-cast bumper bar. Now it's not the easiest thing to do, but if you follow these steps, this is the best way to do it, or this is how I've done it with all my other ones I've built anyway. So let's get started with what tools you're going to need. So I'm using a Dremel multi-tool here. I'm using these black Cutoff wheels, which are the small diameter. They're very thin. This is what I do the majority of the first cutting with, but there are some parts of this die-cast body through the side of the bumper bar here and underneath the front here. The die-cast is really very thick, so then I will actually step up to a larger diameter. This is a Cutoff wheel, a Dremel Cutoff wheel. So they're the two sizes I use. Most of the cutting is the small Dremel wheel, and then I use the larger Dremel wheel to get through the thicker areas of the die cast. Now you will go through quite a few of these, so I've got quite a few that I bought. I'm getting better at cutting these front bumper bars off, but they are still quite a lot of work to remove. So that's basically what you're going to need, your Dremel. Don't forget to wear your safety glasses. Ultra important because you're cutting with metal, and sometimes these little cutting wheels do shatter and fly off in pieces. You don't want to get a piece of that in your eye, otherwise it will be a trip to the hospital. So let's make a start. So what we're going to do here, I'll use a texter first so that you can see what we're going to do. We first want to make a cut through the back edge of the bumper bar. Okay, so this is going to replicate where the resin bumper bar replaces. So hopefully you can see that line there, and you want to sit the body down and you want to cut straight down on this line. It doesn't matter if you go into the headlight bucket either side there, that will help out later on, but what we want to do is we just want to do a light cut, just basically to scribe the line where you're going to cut. Don't try and cut right through straight away, otherwise the cutter might jam and run either way. You don't want to cut back this way from the bumper bar, otherwise when the resin bumper bar attaches you'll have a big gap behind there. So you really want to just cut on this back edge of the bumper bar where you can see my texter mark. So if you use that texter mark as a guide, and I'll turn the Dremel on and we'll start cutting this actual line. Now we're not going to try and cut all the way through here. I just want to cut a light line so that we've got something as we're going to go deeper. The Dremel will follow that slight cut that we've already done. And also I'm just going to cut the sides first. So I'm going to cut straight through here, and then I'm going to cut straight through here and come to a point. We'll cut this little piece out later. So we're just going to start with two cuts, one all the way through here, one all the way through here. So make sure safety glasses, safety first, and we'll turn the Dremel on and we'll start making a light cut. So that's what I want to start with. I want you to cut it on that back edge of the bumper bar. It doesn't matter if you leave a little bit on the back edge there, because we're going to later on sand that back edge off. So this cut is about maybe a millimeter and a half deep at the moment. And by just scribing this cut first, when you continue to go deeper and deeper with the Dremel, it will follow this line. Okay, so we're just going to keep going with that and work a little deeper. Now you can see it's a lot easier for the Dremel to follow that lighter cut when you've already got a small cut to follow. So that's pretty much following that first light cut that I did through there. Now this is going to take some time to cut all the way through here. Your small Dremel wheel will get nearly all the way through close to the edges, but the die cast is very thick underneath this area here and this area here. And you will have to swap to the larger wheel and then drop this back in and cut deeper through the corner part into the bucket. Now, I will get back to that in a minute, but the next cuts we want to do is where this headlight bucket line is here, we want to just cut through here and cut through there. Now, if you cut on a little bit of an angle, you don't want to cut back here and hit that front panel line where it sits against the headlight. So be very careful here. All we want to do is cut through the front edge of the bumper all the way through both sides, and then if we turn the body over, if I can get that, we're going to basically cut through the middle of that, because the whole bumper is going to come off. So it's a lot easier to cut the front section out first, and then we can tackle the sides. So we'll continue on with that. Just be very, very careful with these Dremels. I've been using these for years, so I don't wear gloves, but if you haven't used a Dremel before, maybe buy some leather gloves to hold onto the body, so in case this skips, you don't cut your hand. So always as much care as possible when using a Dremel. And there's a classic example of when these little Dremel things break. Now that sort of just hit me on the arm, didn't really hurt, but as I say, you don't want this going in the eye. So I'll just change one of these bits and we'll get back into it. Okay, so these are the positions where you want to do a cut. So underneath through here, which will cut straight through the middle of this vent opening, which you don't need, both sides, and then by cutting through the front of the side of the bucket in front of the headlight lens here, once you cut right through here and cut the front off, this front section will come out, and then you'll see a little bit more what we're dealing with. So this is going to take quite a while. Take your time. As I say, the small Dremel disc here will get pretty much all the way through to the center, the undersides, and you may have to use the larger one just to get through here into where the headlight buckets are. And once you do that, you will pretty much get all the way through. You just basically do a cut through the sides of this opening here, and this section will come out. So I'll keep going with that, and then I'll get back to you in a minute when I've finished cutting this out. Okay, so here we have, I've spent about another 10-15 minutes on this to cut it away, and this is the piece removed. So you can see how thick the die cast is in the front of this body, and you can see where that piece has come out. So this was the original cut that I marked with the black line right behind, or right on the back edge of the bumper, not behind the bumper, but on the very top edge of the bumper. This is the cut I've done through the top, on the side into the headlight bucket, both sides, and then the underside as well. I'll hold that piece back in there so you can see. So they were the two cuts there through the bottom. And then, as I said, there's going to be two little cuts. Put that back in there so you can see. There's a little cut through here and through there. Now that little cut through there will actually go through to your cut from above, and that's how much die cast metal is in the front. So you can see the side profile of the bumper bar there. This is how much die cast metal you've got to cut through. Not so much on the bottom, but it's that top edge, and you can see through there how deep that cut is. We're about 12, 13, 14 millimeters deep. So that's why you need the larger cut-off wheel to get all the way through that. So as I say, take your time with that to get that front section out, and that's the hardest bit so far to get out. Now the second cut, or the next cuts I should say, is where the bumper bar joins onto the fender, the front fender. So you can see the panel line here now that the paint's been stripped off. We want to cut just under that line. You can always sand a little bit more off, but you can't add more on. So you want to be a little bit safe when you cut this and cut this side of the line. I'm not going to draw my texture on there because it's a bit harder for me to see, but you're cutting on the bumper side of this line. So we're going to do that on both sides, all the way through here. Now again, I'm going to use the small Dremel, and I'm going to cut a very light line because I have more control cutting that line first, and then we'll go deeper. Okay, so as you can see, what I've done, I've just cut a very light line right where I want to cut it. I'm not sure whether you can see that, but I'm just this side of the line. You can see a tiny little bit of die cast metal on this side of the line. This is exactly how you want to cut it, because I can fine tune and sand that little edge to try and fit the resin bumper on there. So I've done that both sides, as you can see, a fine line. Now one thing you want to do with this is, let me try and hold this to the camera. You want to cut square through that way, because you want to just you want to get a good join with the die cast bumper underneath. So you want to just make sure that you hold the body perfectly on its side, or sit it against a block of wood or something, and keep your Dremel flat and just keep cutting through that line. So I'll get on with that. Again, that's going to take a little bit of time because the die cast is quite thick just behind the headlight bucket here. So we'll get on to that now, and I'll show you in a sec when I cut through this. Okay, now I've been cutting for about 2 or 3 minutes, and I've cut nearly all the way through. I've got to hold on to this because it's quite hot. Just following that light line, and this is pretty much just come off. So I actually did this just with the small wheel. So the small wheel just gets through the headlight bucket through here. You can see the cutter underneath the pointy part of the wing, and that's basically what you want to cut off through there. So that I found is the easiest way to cut the bumper off, is to cut it off in the 3 sections. So I'll finish up just getting this side off. And there we have that side, a little bit of wiggling. It's also hot. You can also have a little tub of water just to dip the body in every now and again, just to cool it, because it is die cast metal, so it does heat up. But that's basically what you're left with on the underside, is these 2 flat areas here, which is underneath the front wings. Now this, we're going to sand this flat and smooth for a good adhesion to the resin bumper bar. And I'll also cut these pieces off through here. So this piece through here, I'm just going to cut that off, and I'm going to cut that off there as well. So those pieces aren't needed. So this piece, cut that off, and cut that off as well. So I'll just do that now, and then I'll show you how that looks when it's done. Okay, so now I've cut those 2 lower sections off, the last scrap bits of metal, and this is basically what you're left with. So just capping what we've done, first cut was on the back edge of the bumper bar, then we cut through the sides, the top and the bottom, both sides of the front bumper bar, then we cut through the sides to remove the sides of the original front bumper bar, and then lastly we just cut off those 2 little lumps of die cast on the front here. So that is basically how the new bumper is going to fit on. Now, as I mentioned at the start, we were going to leave that little center part of the bumper bar, so that other last little pointed bit. So we just need to cut that out. As you can see, the resin bumper bar has that little point on it, so that won't overlap that. You've actually got to cut that off. So we're just gonna, I'll just show you if you can't see what I mean, is just this little part here. So that little triangular part, we need to cut that off. Okay, so after another couple of more Dremel wheels that broke, I've finally cut out that last little V point, which is here. So that is all the major cutting done to make the front bumper bar fit. Now the rest of the work is actually just some fine tuning with the sander wheel, and then that will get us to the point where the bumper bar fits how we want it to. So that is the hardest part of this build, is cutting that front bumper bar off. Now what I also use, you can use it in your handheld Dremel. I have another Dremel set up with a handheld extension. I find these very handy to use, and what I'm using is a coarse, this is a large size, this is a coarse sanding wheel, and what I use this for is to sand off all the dags that are left behind where I've cut through this front bumper. So we'll make a start and I'll show you how I sand through this. Important to keep the body, hold the body flat, and keep your drum sander straight up and down as well, because you want that front edge to be flat. You don't want to sand it on an angle or sand it back that way. You want to keep your sander straight up and down. So we'll make a start with this. Plug it in. Okay. So this is going to take a while also, but hopefully you can just see that I cut very close to that back edge of the bumper bar, and I've only left a little bit on there. So I don't like to use a file because a file can put unnecessary pressure on the die-cast body and it may break it. So you may as well let the sander wheel do all the work. Now just by moving backwards and forwards with this sander wheel, you basically work all the way through, and you can see this little splinter come off. This little splinter is the very edge of the back bumper bar. So that's what I want. I want that just to sand that off, and then we know that what material left there is what was behind the factory bumper bar. So if you sand all the way along this front edge, just to the point where this little remaining piece falls off, and that's nearly coming off on the other side already, that's where you want it. So I'll keep going and I'll sand all this off and show you where we're at. Okay, now you see that didn't take too much effort there to get that last little bit off, and now you're back to the clean edge that was behind the original bumper bar. So now if we grab the resin bumper bar and we just dry fit it here, you can see now we're pretty close anyway. We've got to do some more trimming to make that fit, and we've got to do some trimming on the sides next, because you want the bumper bar to fit up how the other one did. So we need to fine tune both of these edges here where the resin bumper bar goes on. and we will do that the same with the sander disc. So keeping in mind that you want to keep this radius here of your wheel arch, so you want this back edge of the bumper bar here to follow that radius of the wheel arch both sides. Now if you're careful and you trim this back, the front part here, you should have no problem with that. The kit does fit very well. So if you do cut this back to where I have there, that should pretty much line up these radius edges of the wheel arches. So again, I'm going to use the sanding wheel here, and I'm just going to slowly, if you can see it that way, I'll do it that way. I'm going to slowly sand through here just to get back to that very little fine edge. You can see I left a little bit of the bumper bar on. That's got to come back just to that line, so you sand it back to that line, both sides. And then we should be pretty close to the bumper bar fitting. Now this side here that I cut through pretty straight. So we're pretty close there, as you can see, the fitment. But this side here, I cut it a little bit crooked. And there's actually more, maybe you can see it that way there. There's actually more meat on the inside here that I have to remove. So you just got to take your time with this. Don't rush it. Because you don't want to wreck the die-cast body. So I'm just going to keep going and try and sand a bit more out of this, and I'll get back to you in a minute. Okay, so now after all that final sanding with the drum sander, the bumper bar nearly fits perfectly. So you can see on the side there, a little bit of fine tuning to do either side, but that's very, very close to how you want the bumper bar. Now at this stage I would recommend fitting the front hood back on. So use the hinges, put all the screws back in there, because that will locate the hood exactly where it's got to go. But you can see even just from this step here how close the actual fitment is. Now the original Auto Art model has a very tight gap between the hood, so that's why I recommend reattaching the hood on its hinges, and then just check your final fitment there. So wherever that hood finishes, once it's screwed on there, you want a very tight gap, not too tight. I'd leave maybe 3/4 of a millimeter, and just continue to find that. You could even use a little small hobby file just to file some of these areas so you don't take too much material off. But that is the hardest part of this kit, and in the next part I'll show you how to fit all the resin parts to the die-cast body. So that's basically it. So if that looks a bit too complex for you, I'm not sure whether you can build this kit, but that is the hardest bit. So hopefully with my instructions it shows you basically how to remove that front bumper bar. Now the next step we need to do is for the front fenders. Now the front fenders on the Liberty Walk Aventador have a big curved section here behind the front wheel, and we need to grind half of this off, otherwise the front resin fender won't fit. So we can just go up to where this angle line is, around there, but where I've put the black texture mark, that's how much we want to grind off. So I'll show you what I'm going to use for that in a minute. Now you want to do that on both sides. So I don't usually mark it with a texture when I cut it myself. This is for you guys so you can see how much we're going to grind that. But we're going to grind it back on a little bit of a curve, a bit of a radius. So I'll show you how we're going to do that. Now I use a different size cutter for that. Now I use what's called a milling piece. Now this is a straight cutter with a milling head on it. Now this will eat through the die-cast metal relatively quickly, that's why I use it. If you've never used one of these before, you can use a smaller sanding wheel. That is a little bit easier sometimes for the inexperienced. So I'm going to change this drum sander to the milling piece. Again, you can use your handheld Dremel for this job. I just find it much easier and more flexibility using this handheld version. So we'll make a start and we'll start grinding out these front fenders. Now you can see how much I've taken out there. I've pretty much taken most of that part of the fender out, and I've just rounded over that top edge to the edge of the marker. Now that way the resin LB fender will fit over that. If you need to, when we get to that next stage and I show you how to test fit and glue these panels on, I'll show you how that works. If that doesn't if that's not enough, we can always come back and we can grind a little bit more out. But that's basically how much you want to take out for the back of the fender to fit over the factory die-cast body. So I'll grind the other side out and we'll get back to you in a minute. Okay, so now as you can see, I've ground out both of the back of these fenders, both sides. Now one of the little tips as well, if you're using one of these handhelds, is to actually use the body as a brace. So put your fingers up here inside the die-cast body, and then when you grind, you've got a lot more control because your fingers are against the die-cast body. So that's one of the safer ways to grind, using leverage off the body. But just remember that these die-cast bodies, when you've got so much cut off them, they are a little bit weaker, so be a little bit careful. And we'll get into this in part 5, but I'll just basically show you what I mean. This is the Resin Fender, and as you can see, this part behind the front wheel has a big round on it, and on the back side, that's what we've ground out for. We've ground that die-cast part out for that fender there, so that when that fender goes on, once the front bumper bar is on, that sits up in behind there. Not sure whether you can see that. That's nearly there. That needs a little bit more ground out of it, but it's pretty close. It's pretty close. So that's what that's for. So once that's done, we've only got 2 more modifications to make to the die-cast body, and that is to the side sills, the Aventador side sills of the model. Now, the way I build these kits is after I do all the grinding out, I will actually reattach the side sill, this entire piece, and then glue the fenders on front and rear, and then I can paint the body in one piece. I haven't done it the other way by painting the body and the flares and then trying to stick those on. I just see that can create many disasters and ruin your paintwork with glue residue, etc., etc. So if you're going to do it the way I do it and re-screw these side sills on, you need to make one modification. Now, there's a screw hole here and a screw hole here. Those 2 screw holes locate the whole interior section into the body. Now, if we just screw these back on now, you won't be able to put the interior back into the model. So what I do is where this little screw is, if you can see that screw hole, we want to grind out a little circle on each side sill. So if we grind out a little circle on each side sill, then we'll have access to that screw, and then once the side sills are glued on with the flares, we'll still be able to screw the interior of the model in. Now, this is exactly the same whether it's the Coupe or the Roadster that we're building. It's exactly the same. So they're the 2 side sills. We've marked the 2 cutouts, but we want to just grind that out again with the milling tool. We just basically want to grind this out. Just be careful of your fingers. And that's basically it. So once the side sill will be screwed back on using the factory screw, you can see now that we've got access to this screw hole. So that will enable us to screw the whole interior pan back in and to continue with the installation or putting back the model together. Okay, so I'll grind the other one out and we'll get back. Okay guys, so that's it. That's the last 2 things that we need to do to the die-cast body. So we have both of those side sills ground out so that we can install the interior pan, and that is pretty much it. That is the 3 main modifications you need to do to fit this LB Performance Liberty Walk kit to this Lamborghini Aventador. So it's the front bumper bar, the back of the front guards grounding out there, but the majority of the work is this front bumper bar. So hopefully if you follow those steps and take your time, you should get the same results. Now, worst case scenario, if you do make a mistake on the body or another part, there is a new website called autoartspares.com. I'll put a link in the description box below, and they do sell spare bodies, doors, things like that. So they don't have every part available, but they do have some parts. So if you do make a big mistake and maybe damaged a whole body, last time I checked, they do have a couple of spare bodies on their website for around 10 or 15 euro, I think. So, but as I say, just take your time, go slow. I did go through probably about 8 or 9 of these discs. They do break if you put a bit of strain on there, so just have a few of those at your disposal. And that's basically it. So the next part, I'll show you how to glue all the LB body parts on, and get this bad boy ready for paint. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, part 4 of how to build the LB Aventador. Stay tuned for part 5. I'll get that to you as soon as possible. If you have any questions, list them below and I'll be sure to help you out. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do. Please like this video also. So until next time, and we move forward on this build, thanks for watching, and bye for now.